Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their career. In this episode, we will be learning from Tiffine Wang from MS&amp Ventures. Tiffine, could you take a few minutes to share your story and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So my path is actually a little bit unconventional. I grew up with a family of small entrepreneurs. I was born and raised in San Francisco. My family migrated from Taiwan. So I've never really had these strict rules around what a career is. We spent a lot of time just solving problems. So when I was younger, I did research. I thought biosciences was very interesting. So I was doing some work at UCSF. But then I decided that I don't think I'd be very happy being stuck in a lab all day. So I went to college and I ended up studying psychology and sociology. So a lot about how the human mind works and then a lot about social systems. I did a lot of different jobs. I was a teacher, I taught first grade, I was a counselor, I was a caseworker. And then eventually I just moved into tech. One of the first jobs that I did moving into tech was the Alchemist. Alchemist is one of the top enterprise accelerators around the world. But prior, when I just joined them, it was actually a training program for entrepreneurs, specifically technical entrepreneurs. And we were figuring out how to scale these programs globally. In that program, I was very lucky to work with some of the world's top entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, and they were mentors for the program, and I really got to know them. And when I broke into tech, I ended up just doing a lot of the things that were non-technical in these little startups. So I did business development, strategy, and all these different things. From there, I moved into building out more incubator and accelerator programs. I built a program called European Innovation Academy. I built out their mentoring program. It started out in Estonia, then moved to France, to Portugal, and eventually Qatar, Hong Kong, China. So that program expanded quite a bit. It started out as a joint program with UC Berkeley, and then eventually moved into, I think, about 40 different universities. And the goal of that program was to give the foundations of entrepreneurship to all the people who enrolled into it. We went from team formation, ideation to a basic MVP all within 3 weeks. So it's extremely intensive program. Today, I still go and judge the finals for that program, but it's a really, really great training program for entrepreneurs. From there, I think I did more operational work and then eventually got picked up by this company called Singtel Group. Singtel is a very large Singaporean conglomerate. They own a bunch of businesses throughout Southeast Asia as well as Australia. And I was doing tech scouting for them and innovation, looking for new technologies to push into the various business units, working with the CEOs and executives to solve really big problems. And I was very lucky to train under them. And then eventually got put on their ventures team. So I joined Singtel Innovate and I was with them for 5 years. And then afterwards, about 2.5 years ago, I joined MS&amp Ventures and I've been with them since.
Very nice. Thank you, Tiffine. What did you learn at Singtel Innovate that you are using today? Let's start with a double click.
Yeah, so Singtel, I've learned a lot of things. I think there's two main things that I've learned. I've got my foundations of how venture capital works there. The partners there came from actually more institutional backgrounds, so I was trained more of what a typical VC needs to do. And the other thing that I learned was when I was working with the CEOs of the very large units was how to manage and build technology and products for very large businesses. And then I did a lot of bridging the gaps, right? I think this is one of the very big problems that CVCs often need to solve. But I really learned how to manage those relationships, how to thread that needle, and then get partnerships to stand up and going. And I really got to understand sort of the levers of what really makes a difference for a big, large businesses. And then with managing the smaller portfolio companies, figuring out how to survive because they have about 8 to 12 months of runway. What is actually the middle ground for the two to meet and actually have a happy medium and be successful together?
Very nice. I think the word relationship comes across in your journey. From when you mentioned you were doing the teaching, building incubators, mentoring program, even the tech scouting is all about relationships. Can you give some tips about how you should engage with entrepreneurs and build meaningful relationship for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was really helpful that I actually been on the operator side as well. I've actually even learned how to code. What's really great about nowadays is every time you want to learn something new, you just go online, find a course, read a couple of books. Before there was online content, I spent a lot of time in libraries just reading about different things, learning about them, and then figuring out how to execute, which actually ended up being a really good foundation for this type of job because you're always having to learn something new. When it comes to engaging with entrepreneurs and different people in the ecosystem, what I found that's very helpful is I'm actually very naturally empathetic. Stepping in the shoe of the other person, what they think about, what they care about, what their objectives are, and then actually just managing and guiding. I think my coaching background has been very helpful, especially working with executives and boards. I usually don't tell people what to do. I hold the space for them to really think through like what they really care about and then figuring out how to bridge the gaps. And I think a lot of my day to day today is actually doing that more than anything.
I love it. So that's one golden nugget, actually, which is looking from the other's perspective and asking questions, make them think through the questions. I will want to talk about the early stage investments and the late stage, but could you maybe first start by sharing the why of this CVC? Because typically the CVCs that works from an insurance company would look more at the series B or C when the business model starts to being firmed up. But here you're being very open that you invested in these entrepreneurs and you know that actually they might change what they are doing.
Yeah. So the reason why we like to invest earlier on is because we think that the future of insurance will look very different than what it looks like today. As a matter of fact, we don't even really invest in companies that we call enablers. So startups that sell to insurance companies. We think the business units should be able to use any of those companies and as many of them as possible because we own entities all over the world. We don't want to force any of them to use any of them. We as a scouting function will go and help find these type of companies and help bridge those relationships. But we actually from the early stage investment perspective, we like to invest in standalone models. So what would this insurance potentially look like? We also invest in quite a bit of new distribution models. Right now a lot of the world is going to this digital first, the future of work, of distributed teams. This is very popular today, but it wasn't a couple years ago. As the MS&AD holdings, it might take some time to adjust to it, but part of what we're doing as MS&AD Ventures is having our feelers and understanding of these new models that are emerging.
Very nice. In a way, it's making sure that you don't have blind spots. You see the
Yeah.
innovations coming as early as possible, and
Yes.
you would expect many of them not to work, but the one that would work could actually be very disruptive.
Yeah. So what's really great is that we have a lot of autonomy. All the decision making stays within my team. We have three partners and we make investments all over the world. So that means we're pre-COVID, we were running around quite a bit and we've had this system that we can close deals very agile. We'll do a lot of closing deals over text and having conversations quickly. And so we move quickly as well. So yes, we don't need to have a business unit buy-in for our early stage investments.
Very nice. You talk about quick, which most CVCs are being told they're not that quick. So, what is quick for you?
So we make most decisions within 2 weeks, and we can move faster if we really need to. The reason why is because in the early stage, it's very competitive, right? And you don't have the luxury of weeks and weeks of meetings with your IC. The IC is just the three partners, and it makes a world's difference when it's at the early stages, especially when there isn't this big conversation. We do have this strategic lens where we look at how this can potentially fit in the future, but that's something that we think through as my team, not necessarily like with headquarters, because what they're looking at is very different than what we're looking at because we're thinking about what the future may look like.
That's very nice and very fast. So, I think you have three teams. You have the investment team that invest early stage. And then you mentioned you have the business development team that can actually be doing tech scouting as well as supporting later stage development. Maybe you can tell me more about how you see the investment team and the business development team.
Yeah. So I actually have built the team so that we are actually one team. The great part about this, and this is actually from my learnings from Singtel and my past work, and actually working, just hearing the pains of a lot of the CVCs and when I'm attending GCV events, is that why do you have to keep it so separate? And I've sat on both sides. I've done work on the innovation and partnership side. I've done work on the investment side. A lot of the core functions are actually very similar. So even though I'm technically on the investment team, I do plenty of BD work. And I always encourage my BD team, like they can sit in any of the meetings that I have. So we're a very collaborative group. So we call them the one team management style. So usually it's very inclusive. And that's something that I've really wanted to change about and made sure that it was instilled in the culture of my team. And so I made it very flexible so people can learn and own everything. And that's also the same way when we're covering a lot of topics. The fun part about working for CVC, the good and the bad, right, is like there's so many choices. There's so many things to cover.
Yeah.
Who knows what headquarters want? This week it's blockchain, next week it's ESG, right? I'm sure a lot of us are looking at very similar things. But I actually really love that. I love being able to have a lot of different choices. And so I actually give my team same open freedom. They need to get their work done. They can cover topics together. So it's not strictly like you get to do this. We can spin teams up and then spin teams down depending on what projects are coming in and out. So we work very closely together. I have a very natural filter for if companies are coming in and it's early stage, it's going to go to a certain team members. If they happen to be later stage and ready for business development, I'll pull in my business development teams into the meetings. So we try to keep things very fluid on our team.
Very nice. Let's talk about investment decision making. So you can make investments fast, but it doesn't mean that you don't have a process to make good decisions. How do you go through the investments? Would you involved? How do you challenge the ideas?
Yeah, so typically what we do is it depends on who meets the companies first. We'll meet the companies and then we just bring it to the partners. We have 3 partners. We'll have a discussion about it. If there's time, we'll have a second meeting and we'll meet the company and then we'll typically decide then.
Okay. But sometimes you decide with just one meeting.
Sometimes we do.
Wow. Okay. I think you're one of the fastest CVC I know and one of the most like financial VC I know. So this is really impressive. Talking of something that looks like a financial VC, you mentioned you have fund of $200 million. You also have carry model. So how do you think about reserves versus making your first investment?
Yeah, so we typically will invest a total of 2 to 2.5 million per company. So our first check might be 1.5 million, and then we have some reserves for follow-on. Sometimes we'll write a bigger check, and then our follow-on check will be a little bit smaller. We'll typically end up with approximately 2.5 per check. With that said, we're in discussions because a lot of the companies they raised like really quickly. We did the investment, and then they went into their following round right away. So we adjusted a little bit. So we don't have a perfect model. The paper model is approximately 2.5 per a company, but some of them is going to be a little bit case by case.
Very nice. So I want to talk about the fact you work for a multinational, so many different cultures. You invest globally, many different cultures. How do you build your CVC to handle this exponential complexity?
Yeah, what's really great is the team members that we've brought on, everyone just is from different cultures and they're used to working with a lot of different cultures. I just love learning about different cultures and thinking about how they work and how they think. I think prior we were just talking about the similarities of like French and Taiwanese culture, right? There's a lot of potential overlap. And I think like working with Japanese culture is very different than working with Singaporean culture, very different than Australian culture and working with British culture. But it's just really understanding what their value systems are, how they make decisions, and what they value. All the cultures are a little bit different, even though as a VC, it's, hey, we should probably make money, right? But the things that they value from a strategic standpoint might be a little bit different. And so it's just spending the time to understand each of the differences in these cultures and then figuring out how to bridge or even speak the language of how they're thinking and what makes them excited.
Very nice. I want to go to the differences you've observed between your time in Singtel and your time today. And what do you think are the best practices that Singtel had that you really wanted to deploy today?
I think working for Singtel, the biggest things that I've learned was governance. Not to say that MS&AD doesn't have governance, but it was a really, really great foundation. They were very strict about a lot of things. And that was a really great foundation for understanding venture capital, understanding how finances work, understanding how working with very large businesses work. And then working with Japan, I think to have a little bit less control because there's a language barrier and I have to work through my colleagues. With the Japanese, once you close a contract, you have a much longer term relationship, and that's very much expected versus different places where like it might be like, hey, this is only for this year. Japan tends to like building much longer term relationships, but it does take some time to build that trust and actually figure out how that relationship looks like.
Very nice. You mentioned your team is very diverse, but I want to touch about your investments because you invest so early stage. This is where you can actually encourage, enable, support even more diversity and the right entrepreneurs to get supported. How do you think about diversity, especially at the early stage investment?
Yeah, there's a lot of general guidelines. So we care a lot about impact, making the world better, inclusion, sustainability. And when it comes to early stage startups, all we can do is actually just have conversations with the founders early on. It's really hard to put in any set rules like what they should or should not do because they're just starting to build out their company. So being open and having these type of conversations with the founders, we found that most of the founders are quite welcoming of these type of conversations. And it's like holding the space, holding round tables so that they can get together and have a discussion about a couple of these things. And it's really great for them to just actually learn from each other. The great thing about having a global portfolio is that, for instance, what we're seeing is in a lot of the emerging markets, some of the behaviors are similar. And so when we get those CEOs together, they can talk about best practices and how to support one another. We have a company called Multiplier where they're a global employee management platform. We think that, hey, you can build a company, you can have people everywhere. And before, this was a lot more difficult to spin someone up and you have to put them as a contractor. But Multiplier was built so that you can really take care of each person as your employee. And then they're going to pull together the tools and things that are needed to really figure out how to run a global team. This is something new, right? And it got really popular during COVID, but we're seeing this shift in culture.
Very nice. Let's switch gear to the CVC design. Today, your CVC is reporting to whom, and how often do you update your activities to the mothership?
So we technically report to the group CFO who sits on our board. And from a reporting standpoint, I think we have a team that works on just giving them monthly updates on what's happening. My partner talk speaks with that team very regularly. And then we have a few board meetings throughout the year just to update them on what's happening and then figuring out sort of the plans for the next coming couple of years.
What other perception you think are wrong about Japan that you think would be helpful for everyone to know? This is not the Japan that you hear about. This is actually a much better.
Yeah, I actually didn't have any preconceptions when I decided to join MS&AD. When I met my partners, John and Tak, I just really loved the way they thought. And working with the Japanese culture is they really do trust you. Once they decide to hire you and bring you on, they really do trust you. And then they're all about let's build this together and let's figure out like how to make things work. And that's been really great. I really love my colleagues. They've been just really wonderful to work with. And then supporting them on getting that innovator's mindset, like because in Japan, there is a lot of structure in headquarters and there are certain ways of making decision making. Sitting on an innovation team is like, hey, let's figure out like how to get people to think differently. It's that mindset change, right? And it is quite a bit of a journey, but I think that's part of the fun, right? So it depends on how much people can tolerate it. Some people really like just say, hey, this is too much work, but something about getting this shift to happen is something that I really enjoy doing.
Yeah, I think the shift is real. I was talking with one of our corporate officers a few weeks back, and he was basically saying that we make a decision to invest a few $1,000,000 in 80 minutes. They used to have long debates at the executive committee level for the same amount of money, and they would still decide not to invest. So I think the shift is important. And maybe you can tell me about how much do you think a CVC can be a positive change agent for a corporation to actually even become more agile without any of the strategic value of the CVC, really as a way of thinking differently?
Yeah, I think it helps when the executives buy into it. I think both for Singtel Group and MS&AD, both of the groups on the very top executive level, they really believed in us and they really supported us working with the business units. And our whole job is to make it better for all of our business units, to make it easier to innovate. Because a lot of the business units are not structured to innovate.
It's so interesting. So I want to end the interview with why would people come to you? Different type of deals, maybe a career advice. Why they should come to you?
Yeah, so in terms of insurtech, fintech, we're doing quite well here. I like to think that we have quite a bit of experience here, so that's something that I love having that conversation with. But I actually really love conversations about sort of transitions. Anyone who's looking to build a new CVC or like figuring out how to structure CVC, like I love it when you're at that stage when you're just starting out, and that's when I think I can also be the most helpful. When you're in the middle of it, I can still help you, but when you're at the very beginning, when you're still structuring things, those are probably a very good time to come and have a very casual discussion.
Very nice. I might take you up, even though we are about 3 years old also, but I think we could have our respective teams meeting together because we could share a good practice and work close to
Yeah,
each other.
absolutely.
Very nice. What about career advice? Is that something that you're open to discuss with people?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually do a lot of mentoring and advising. What's important to me is like people come actually with good prepared questions. I hate it when someone says, "Hey, how do you get into venture?" There's so many books, there's so many things that you can read about. But if you have something like specific that you're trying to overcome, like how to get board experience, how to deal with certain types of scenarios, I love problem solving people problems. So those you can come to me for.
Very nice. And then my last question, which you can take 3-4 minutes for, what are you most excited to invest next? Do you already have some ideas about what you're going to do a deep exploration in and that you want to learn about?
Yeah, we've been spending some time looking at digital health. We're spending some time in Web3. We're continuing to look at fintech and insurtech. But I actually really like the convergence of a couple of these sectors, right? So I like things that are very different. So those are my favorite ones to look at, where you can put all these things in the buckets and then you're like, oh my gosh, I can't fit this into a bucket. Those are the ones that I'm like really excited because you're learning something really different.
A totally new approach. Very nice. Tiffine, I really enjoyed our discussion today. I think you shared many golden nuggets, and I love the way you're building your team and making them work as one team. And you are super fast. This is really impressive for a CVC.
Thank you so much.